Hello and welcome to The Extras, where we take you behind the scenes of your favorite TV shows, movies, and animation, and they're released on digital, DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K, or your favorite streaming site. I'm Tim Millard, your host, and today I'm very excited to have co-creator and executive producer of the original TV series The Flash from 1990, Danny Bilson, and The Flash himself, John Wesley Shipp. Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hey, thanks for having us.
So the main reason we're a little delayed on getting this out, the Blu-ray is coming out today, but that's because we're all waiting to get our copies right here at the end so that we could take a look at this. But did you get a chance to look at your Blu-ray, and what were your original thoughts here as you looked at it?
Well, mine were, I think it looks great. My first reaction, being so actor and character centric, and now it's like the canvas has opened up and the clarity and the depth. I can see everything that everybody was doing behind me. It's like there's so much to look at. I mean, there was so much going on. Now I understand those nights when I was like, why are you walking down there lighting all of that? I'm sweating my, what off in the suit. And now I'm like, oh my God, that's what they were doing. Oh, wow. And so for me, it's faster paced because there's more clarity and you could see more of what's going on. And yeah, I mean, I'm delighted.
Yeah, I looked at, I got my copy yesterday, and I looked at, I chose one episode that I directed at random that I haven't seen in 30 years, which was the Mirror Master, I think Done with Mirrors, it's called, the one with David Cassidy. And as someone who looked at all the film, right, in those days, it was all shot on film. And I don't remember how we consumed dailies. I really don't. I don't know if we screened them or if we were watching big video cassettes. But I think we probably screened them. And it looked like it looked on film, like 30 years ago. That's what it looks like. When you take a 480i signal and you put it on a CRT, the old TVs, it looks pretty good. When you put those old DVDs on a high-res screen, the 480i, 480p doesn't hold up so well. So it was really nice to see it as I saw it then. I will say, and I knew this was going to happen, is that there's a positive and a negative to this whole thing. There was this wonderful woman who ran post-production at Warner Brothers TV named Karen Pignator back then. And she insisted that we finish on film, on a film negative. But the issue was we were one of the two first shows to be doing digital effects in television. The other was Star Trek, Next Generation, and us. It was the same team at the Post Group operating this stuff. And we're outputting these beautiful effects in video at 480i. So now when we had to go back to film, you had to take those, we did this back then, put them through the optical printer to get them to film, and they always look bad. They look bad originally because we were printing to film and then going to, in the old days, we were still showing that printed version that you have now. But the effects, nobody's ever seen the effects looking the way they did on video. Like we saw them at the Post Group or before they were all, low res, printed to high res. So everything looks beautiful, but every time there's an optical print, like a transition between a scene or an effect, it's a little raw, right? But back then, it's really weird because the public didn't see it either. So I'll finish this up. We were upset back then because the effects all got degenerated to film. But if they hadn't, we wouldn't have this now. So we have the high def version only because we were finishing on film, but we're all still left with that. The sacrifice was that the effects never looked as good as the team built them at the Post Group because we had to finish on film. I don't believe Star Trek had to finish on film. I don't believe they did. And that was at Paramount. And so those videos, everything looks the same in 480i. So that's that was what I was the most interested in. And then, like John said, you could see all the other work, right? Like, I don't know if everybody's seen all the other work so well in 30 years. We've seen John's work and some of the other great actors. I'll also talk about guest stars in a
Yeah.
minute because it's like, holy
Yeah.
cow, and April Webster and all that. But we always saw the folks, the people, but seeing all the detail that people like Don Kurt spent his whole time on. I actually spent last weekend with Don. And he just produced Dark Matter, which is running on Apple right now. So he's still at it as a visual line, the most visual line producer around, and that was wonderful to see. Okay, enough.
Well, no,
No, it is.
I'm
It
glad
totally
you brought
is.
it up, and because I was going to ask you specifically about the optical effects, because doing what I do, working in home entertainment, seeing these physical mini releases, and then listening to what the fans have to say. One of the big things about the sci-fi shows of the 80s and 90s is just what you're talking about. And a lot of time they just look horrible. And we get so many, people saying, "Hey, why don't they redo them?" And it's like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me for the cost and the time." And it's just not going to happen to redo them all. It's just not the world we live in. But then I was excited when I heard you on the commentary talking about that process you just explained, the fact that you went back to film. And I knew then, I was like, these should look much better for the viewer, not for you. I know you are always going to have that higher quality, remembering the original. But for the viewers now, when they pop these in, I mean, I'm looking at them and I'm thinking, hey, this holds up so much better than most shows from that era. Looks really good because you guys did go back to film.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
for
read a
sure.
review that said that the effects hold up amazingly well. Now obviously there are some times when you can see the switch,
Sure.
but I for the most part, realizing what we're looking at, I was I was very impressed by the way it looked and by everything that happened at the prison. Because I watched the pilot. I mean, that
Uh-huh.
was insane. It's just the number of camera shots and angles and everything
Well, the
going on in the
lights.
background and the lights and the cops and the way in the background of the prison. It was so specific and coordinating what everybody was doing and the tear gas and the shotgun blasts and the special effects of the tornado that rises him up being electrocuted and then falling down. I mean, I have to say, I was impressed.
Well, the hardest thing, honestly, and I was watching it, was getting it done. To be honest, the hardest thing was getting it done because we were doing those in like 7 days, and by today's budgets, I guess relatively it would be similar to a network show, not an HBO or anything like that. It would be more like The Equalizer on CBS. It'd be that kind of stuff. But if you put it up against something like that, it holds its own pretty well visually. And again, the design of the effects, the building of the effects was actually really good. It was just that optical printing of digital effects. And if we had, look, I don't think we could have afforded to do the show in all optical printed effects, all film effects. I don't think we could have afforded because we had so many effect shots every episode. I was surprised in Mirror Master, like how many effect shots there were.
Well, I think it holds up really well. And I think fans will, to what your point, John, what that reviewer said, hey, these look pretty good, especially if you buy and you collect that era. It looks really good, and it doesn't take you out. That's the main part. As you're viewing, it doesn't take you
Doesn't
out.
take you,
Yeah,
didn't take me out.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing that you mentioned on a little bit, Danny, was the rest of the images, the set designs, all of the props, everything that you now see in so much more detail, and they look great and they hold up. And the suit, I was a little worried too about the suit, right, in HD, and I think it holds up very well.
Well,
I was looking at the suit. I thought, we were always patching seams, and I was always sweating through it, so the foam latex was crumbling by like the second episode, and so I was wondering how is that going to look. But particularly a couple of shots where we have the multicolored background in the tunnel with Pike, and I'm looking at the shading and the individual muscle pieces, and I'm like, it's really blood red. The shading really is dark blood red now, and you can see the definition that I thought that in many instances the suit looked, if anything, better. It may be
and
me mellowing with time. I don't know, but
Well, look, John versus the suit is half the production of the show. That's the real
Danny, at one
villain.
point, Danny, at one point, weren't you going to get talk about getting me? I don't know if you were joking or not, getting me a psychiatrist because you thought I said, Danny, it's not a mental problem; it's hot.
Yeah. Well, why don't you talk a little bit about that? I asked fans to submit some questions, and a number of them, and I'm sure you get these at the cons and everything as well. Talk a little bit about playing in the suit, the heat, all those things, and that experience.
Well, anyone who's ever played one of these roles, Batman, Tim Burton, Batman on, has challenges in the suit. And let me just say, over the years, Danny, I've learned that no one wants to hear someone who's been privileged to play one of these iconic characters whine about, oh, my suit was so hard. Now, given that, my suit was really challenging because it was a couple inches of sculpted foam latex, individual muscle pieces glued over a spandex suit, and then flocked with a red material. And it had to be glued to my face and under my chin and then taken off with acetate. I forget what that was called then. And then the makeup for Barry and then the thing. But the most thing was clearly during the pilot before we got the cooling vest was I'd be in it like 25 minutes and I was the sponge. You could come up and water, you could bring me out. They would take the gloves off and just turn them upside down and pour the water out. Uh, so going back and forth, which we did at the beginning, I remember my first scenes as Barry, the first episode of the regular season, not the hour and a half movie. Um, I think I started shooting Barry scenes at something like indoors at like 5 a.m. after working in the suit, So it was like, oh my God. And then there was difficult. We learned it was a learning process. It was Flashberry, Flashberry. Well, that meant that this was coming off and then makeup over top and then the makeup and the more glue and it was really uh, not workable. So we came up with a system where we would either preferably, if we could, uh, do the Barry scenes first, then do all the Flash scenes. If we had to, do the Flash scenes first and then do the Barry scenes, but try not to go Flash Barry, Flash Barry. And I hope I wasn't too much of a whiner. I did have a really fun thing was that I couldn't sit down in it. But Warner Brothers had a solution for that. They rolled out the old Betty Davis lean board for the costume epics
Right.
where the women were wearing the ball gowns. And you would step up into this thing and lean back and prop your arms. And then they take the tubing out of the back, plug me into an ice chest, and that would circulate ice water and at least lower my body temperature because, the director would be talking to me and suddenly, I'm listening to him. Yeah, and they're like, okay, plug him in, wake him up. But I have to say, the suit, for all its challenges, designed by, is it George Stevens?
Bob Short. Bob Short.
But who did the drawing?
Oh, Dave Stevens.
Dave Stevens, and then built by Bob Short. I mean, we had Oscar winners working on this thing, and people still write me and tell me how much they love that suit. So it totally fulfilled its purpose,
I, I
I
want to
think.
I want to do one follow up to that question that came from a fan, and they wanted to know what was your. Do you remember what the first time you saw yourself in it? And tell us about that.
Well, it was a rush for everybody. Remember the first night we were testing it on the back lot, Danny? I came out in it, and it was like it was overwhelming. And then we had to decide how is he going to run because in the blur, when I run, it was going up and down. So they said, okay, try doing a Groucho Marx scoot. And so there I am all over the back lot, doing a Groucho Marx. Then I was going to just run. And and luckily Dane Farwell, who was my stuntman, I give him all the credit in the world. I say I played Barry Allen. That was my job, to get the audience to come with me into the suit. Dane was as much the Flash as I and Shirley Walker and Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo and the lighting effects and was. By the time all that started happening, I sort of felt my job, my real job, was over. Not over, obviously, but had been completed. That was my focus. And that's when I was very leery of auditioning at the beginning for a superhero show for television, because my only frame of reference was it being spoofed. Now, believe me, I was watching Batman as a kid every week. I love it. I just didn't feel like that's where my talents, I was always uncomfortable if I felt like, uh-oh, this is supposed to be funny. Um, but April Webster said, "This is why we're coming to you, because you do your to the best of my ability within the context of a heightened reality show to play as truthful the person uh, as I possibly could." I don't know if I answered your question, but I
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just kind of it's interesting the world we live in, and I do want to get your perspective on it. But with all of the cons and all of the cosplay, there's just a fascination with the suits. There really is,
yeah.
and I think people probably ask you, what did you think the first time you saw yourself in it? And you're probably thinking, oh, gee, that's so long ago, it's hard to remember. But um, fans just love the suits, and it's really fun, and
I have to
people
tell
want to wear their
I
own
have to tell
suits.
you I have to tell you a quick story about that. When I came back in Elseworlds in the CW show as 1990 Barry Allen, and they had gotten from Warner Archives in what looked like a coffin one of the original suits, Danny, and I know it was the one I last wore because the wings were missing. When I
I have,
ripped them off, and
I have, yeah.
and for reference, and they built a new suit, and I heard I was very, very reticent. I'm like, that was 28 years ago, right? And when I walked on the set, everyone was so excited and stuff. But I heard Mark Guggenheim say, vis-a-vis the suit, when he put on the suit, he started moving and talking the way he did as that character back in 1991. And of course, actors, we all realize that our costume, what we're wearing, has a large part to do with our characterization, particularly with a costume superhero to that extreme.
Yeah, that was super cool. You texted me a photo of yourself in the dressing room, putting it on when you first got the suit on, and I thought that's pretty wild. That was really neat.
Nothing I ever expected. It was just physically for everybody, not just me. You think I had it bad the number of hours I was there? What kind of hours were our transportation department putting in? Like 25-hour
Well,
days?
I don't know. We'd have to ask Benji, who I still talk. I mean, we're all friends. That's the funny thing is, for those of who are still alive, we're still in contact and we're all still friends. Everybody from the hairdresser to the effects producer to the line producer to other writers, ADs. I mean, they're all still my friends. Music, yeah, everybody.
Well,
I see Howard taking a lot of conventions,
Oh,
and
good.
yeah, yeah, love Howard.
He's a major influence on the show. I will always say that his experience in not mainstream comics, his experience in sort of his blending of film noir film and literature and comics and everything that he does was a huge influence in a right way on our show, really. Because I mean, Paul and I were looking for fresh and innovative, but he had a voice that when we could keep it from being too complex at times, it was just wonderful. I mean, I don't know, maybe they'll ask us what our favorite episodes are. Maybe that's not fair. But um, I will say that the pilot that Paul and I wrote, of course, is we'll talk about writing when you want to
sure.
talk about
No,
writing.
it's fine. Go ahead now.
Okay, I was just going to say that the way we worked was Paul and I wrote the pilot. And we always saw ourselves as movie people. It's really weird, as movie writers. So every episode was its own kind of movie, and we would turn it over to the writer and the director. And throughout my whole career in TV, it was always, we never wanted format because we weren't doing serialized. We were doing individual episodes. We would have preferred it, but it wasn't possible at the time because of syndication and stuff. But our theory was always make your movie, right? I would say on The Flash, the writing, Paul and I rewrote everything to some degree because we were there late every night, but we didn't take credit for it. So you won't see our names on a lot of episodes, but we would polish them. We'd polish every single on that show. We polished every single episode. So, and then I directed a bunch, which was I loved. I just loved doing, and even in the pilot, I did all the action. I think in the pilot, but the idea was each one's its own. Ideally, its own kind of show, its own kind of movie, and then if we didn't like it, we just wouldn't bring that director back. That was kind of our strategy. It's like we didn't tell anybody do it my way. We would just let them do their thing and see how it went. And that was kind of how that went. And we should anyway. I'll let you ask them.
Well, yeah, just to follow up to that, because I did want to ask you about, you guys wrote the pilot, you and Paul, but before that, take us back a little bit before that. I know there was a show before.
Oh, yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, and then what kind of brought you to The Flash? I mean, some people say, well, I always want to do the show. Other people say, no, it's just the studio brought it to me. Tell us that story a little bit.
Well, we were at Warner Brothers. Look, Paul and I we came from B movies that were very comic booky and comic book influence. That's where we started at Empire Pictures in the 80s. And with Zone Troopers and Trancers and some of those, they were all kind of wild B movies that were a little more mainstream. They weren't exploitive. Like the stuff we did wasn't exploitive. Wasn't really violent. Had a little bit of comedy. So we started there. When we got to Warner Brothers, Paul was a huge DC fan growing up, a Superman fan in particular. And we had the catalog in a way. And what we wanted to do, because we were big fans of Watchmen, and we were already developing The Rocketeer for years by the time we got to The Flash. So we used to shop at the Golden Apple on Melrose. I don't want to digress too much, but when we were working at the B Movie Company, we would go there for lunch at least 1 or 2 days a week and go through the bins. And that's how, so we were already into that world, and the Tim Burton Batman was a big permission slip. It was a permission slip to interpret in a more adult way. I can't say now when I look at it, I think it's so adult, but by comparison at the time, it certainly was for a comic book show. So we wrote this script because we loved The Watchmen. Okay, I just loved Watchmen. There were like 3 books: Dark Knight, Watchmen, and American Flag by Howard, that were our big influences, and Rocketeer, of course. So we created this show called Unlimited Powers, where the Flash was the main character. We wrote a script, I still think it's one of our best, about all superheroes were outlawed in this future. And it was all the villains were all now running the country, but nobody knew because they were all disguised and had taken on different personas. And the Flash was like a 40-year-old guy who wouldn't surrender his powers, was frozen, and sort of led this rebellion of superheroes. And all the development people at CBS, this is a year before our Flash, all the development people just loved it. And out of that came, why don't you just do The Flash? Just work on The Flash. So then we developed the origin story, the script, and really the traditional origin story. When we said this then, I'll say it now, nothing's any different. Our concept was to make television with the same believability that we read comics when we were 10. If that makes sense. It doesn't mean reality. It just means believable enough. And again, I'll go back to the episode I watched last night to prepare for this, which was Done with Mirrors with David Cassidy. And it was a film noir story. I mean, it was good. I mean, like, the crime was flipping, the gags were good. Barry was obsessed. The girl was teasing the hell out of Barry. John played the hell out of it. Tina was jealous. Tina's mom was in it. And there was crazy snakes, real snakes, by the way, not optical snakes, all over John. Johnny Disco as the mime, which made me fall out because there was a lot of jokes about the mime. But really, that's how it evolved from unlimited powers to the Flash, with always that same feeling of believable in its own reality. And I got that from Ron Howard, who said that as a director early on. But I mean, that was just an expression of what we were doing.
And then
When I was having my first conversation with April Webster, and I was expressing some doubts. I had been in New York, I'd been on Broadway, I had done some work. I perhaps delusionally fashioned myself a serious actor. And she said, John, just do me a favor. Just read the pilot script. Read Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo's treatment of the script. And I'm reading the script, and suddenly I discover all these human values. Here's a CSI guy before CSI was cool, in a family where real cops work the streets, and his dad's always putting him down. He's the unblessed son of a cop family where real cops work the streets. His older brother is the blessed son, but yet they have a real closeness, played incredibly well by Tim Thomerson. I still think some of my best work in the pilot is with Tim because Tim is so good, you know. And then he gets these powers, and it's not, okay, I'm going to go be a cute Hollywood hero. It's like, I don't want to know from this. I want to get rid of him. Now that really piqued my interest. He doesn't want him until his brother's killed. And then he has a mission. And that's when my character really takes off, I think, in the pilot, when the mission of avenging the death of my brother becomes paramount. And I'm like, these are all, I got in trouble for using the relationship word at the upfronts. Remember, Danny? Because relationship was the buzzword that year. But the relationships, I stuck to my guns, really intrigued me. There was a lot of humanity going on within this action adventure superhero context. So that's, I was like, I don't know about the superhero stuff. I had to learn everything from Danny and Paul, but I could certainly play those elements, the human elements, which were ever present.
Mm-hmm. And that's just, it's interesting. Like, it was innovative for superheroes at the time. It's de rigueur. It's standard now. I mean, look, the Bilson DeMeo career, the Pet Fly story, has a lot of stuff that is beloved now where we didn't have enough success at the time to continue to develop our work. In particular, The Flash and The Rocketeer. Both of those are truly beloved now by the kids who grew up with those things. And it's not about money or profit. It's about, we didn't get to continue to develop and get a season 2 of The Flash or a sequel to The Rocketeer. Ultimately there was, I don't know, what did they do? 200 episodes or something on the CW, or 150. And they're always talking about a Rocketeer sequel, but they never involved us, or now just me. So there's something poignant about the whole thing and kind of sweet that I look at the Rocketeer and the Flash, they're very related. Very, very related in terms. Even Dave Stevens, who created the Rocketeer and drew it, we had him come in and draw that suit to convince Jeff Sagansky at CBS to not put John in a sweatpants with LED tennis shoes.
Can you imagine?
That's true. I mean, then we would have been like every other early superhero show, right? So we were trying to get to the next gen, to that 80s influence from comics to Burton to us, right? And all the other folks involved with Batman, Uslan, and all the other great people who allowed that to happen and made it happen. But yeah, I mean, it was that the success of it is now, right? Is right now. And John is working all the time. And the CW show, look, what's it like for me, or what was it like for Paul before he passed? We kept asking to work on the show. We kept asking for a script. I even went in and met with them once. They had a lot of writers on that show, but no, we never got to. But let me go back to something else I was going to say earlier. All that cool art we're talking about in the video was so influential or impressed or inspired so many people that on the CW show, I believe, John, you can correct me on this, they were using our Central City logos. When they did an episode with the Trickster, they tried to recreate the set
The
from our
trickster's lair.
Trickster of his warehouse. And Mark actually called me before he took the gig and said, "Are you okay if I do this?" Because he felt so loyal to the old show. Now I said, "Are you kidding? Go. What are you talking about?" You know what I mean? And Vito, we had a bunch of people that they had guests, and John, of course, was a running character on the show. So all that is super. At the end of the day, it's super nice. I don't know what else to say. It validates or shows respect for our work, right?
Yeah,
That
David
people
Nutter,
liked it as much as we did, right?
David
Nutter, oh,
Nutter,
great
who
director.
directed the pilot, who Emmy-winning director, Red Wedding, Game of
Game of
Thrones.
Thrones. I mean, he's
He, after I finished that first prison scene where we do the moment with the hand on the glass, that they sort of recreated for the movie, but after we finished shooting that scene, he called everybody together and he called me and stood beside me. And he said, none of us would be, he spelled it out. He said, none of us would be here today if these guys hadn't proved in 1990 and 91 that it was possible. So, yeah, there was great. I know Andrew Kreisberg was determined to bring you on, Danny. He and I talked about it. We talked about it. And then he left the show. He ended up leaving the show, and the Hellboys took over. It went a completely different direction. But I always thought how cool it would be. I also want to talk about Danny as a writer and as a director, as careful as he was as a writer. And I find this with the writers I've worked with who are really secure. There was one point in the lab where Barry had to bare his soul about something to Tina, and it just didn't feel quite. I wasn't. It was perfect. I was not connecting with it the way it was written, and I was like, Danny, I don't know. I just can't get around this. I just don't. He said, well, what's wrong? I said, I just don't really feel like this is really what he needs to say. And then Danny said, for the next logical question, well, what do you think he needs to say? I said, well, I don't know, something along the lines of, this and this and this and this. And he said, well, let's put that together and say that. So very supportive. The other thing that I always tell Danny, actors are so rigid about their eye lines. It's like I've seen actors explode if anybody gets in their eye line. And when Danny would direct an episode, do you remember once, Danny, you were by the camera and you said, John, am I in your eye line? And I said, no, Danny, I like it when you're in my eye line. One of the few only directors, because everything that I got for that character, I got from Danny and Paul. And Danny was so there and so uncompromising. Sometimes we wish maybe he'd compromise at 5 in the morning. But he was so there and he was feeding the scene and the action. He was feeding whatever emotion I was playing, that the consciousness of his presence where I knew he was there was invariably helpful. That almost never, ever happens.
Yeah, that's weird. I don't remember. Are you saying that or
Hey,
anything?
remember? Don't you remember? You said, oh, John, am I in your eye line? I said, no, Danny,
No,
I
no, I
like
can
it
remember me saying that.
when you're in my eye line. It's
No, I
fine.
don't
And so
remember.
you stayed right there.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
I was gonna say.
we need to talk about some of your guest stars and co-stars, but let me go to a question from one of the fans here that'll lead us right into that. And that is, how much fun, John, was it to play Evil Flash in the Trial of the Trickster? And how was it working with Mark Hamill?
Danny will tell you, I was so paranoid about wearing a superhero suit in 1990. A-list actors were not lining up to play costume superheroes in 1990, okay? I didn't know what effect, ultimately. I was terrified of being viewed as a mascot. I never wanted to have B-roll of me in the set with the cowl back, drinking a Diet Coke and eating a hot dog, So thankfully they were very careful, about that to maintain the integrity of the suit. I'm stiff in the first episodes. And I also wanted to be monosyllabic because I just felt it was a character unto its own, and I didn't want to conflict it with Barry, who was the real human. Okay, so there I am being all neurotic and paranoid, and here comes Mark, balls to the wall, no self-consciousness, 100% committed to this character, and playing it with every ounce of his energy for all it was worth all the time. And I have to say, it took me a while, but it finally seeped in. If Mark friggin' Hamill can commit to this extent, then I need to get over my bad self. And I think it may have taken till the final episode, the trial of the trickster, where I'm like wearing trickster boots and I'm knocking over. And think about the things we did. We caught billets and threw them back at the police. I mean, we were edgy, I think edgy and darker than certainly the CW show. We did things
Oh yeah,
that
we're much edgier. Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, they never let us do that today. But yeah, being mind controlled by the trickster and even daring to be goofy in the suit. I have to credit Mark's fearlessness and dedication, for teaching me a little bit there.
Yeah, directing, I directed both the Tricksters, and definitely the first Trickster is my favorite of the whole thing because it's the first time we got to really do a full-blown comic villain. And look, I didn't tell Mark how to play that. Let's be serious here. When you're directing in television in particular, even if it was my own show, I wanted to cover one thing. Because it was my own show, I was able to direct and rewrite on the set. That's not so easy if you're not in full control. Like, so John and I can do that kind of stuff there. But Mark, like John said, I didn't tell him how to play the trickster. You know what I mean? He put that thing on and he was like, I don't remember if it was the first stuff we shot, but I felt like the beginning at the theater and all that. And he's menacing and crazy and killer. And then he puts the thing on. So by the time, even in that one where he has John in the water torture, which to me was the most harrowing thing we ever did. Like, at least for me, standing there on the Flash, having John, the actor, going into the water torture thing. I'll tell you that Lana, the hairdresser, who was, I still am friends and was like our set mom. David Newman and I, the AD, turned around like this while John was in the thing, and she was weeping in terror. Oh my God, they're gonna kill him!
Well, I was hanging.
Like, get her out of here!
I was hanging suspended from my ankles from the top of the soundstage, handcuffed, and they had this huge glass container full of gallons and gallons and gallons of water, and they lowered me unconscious by my ankles, hanging by my ankles into this tank of water, and the gag was, then I go all the way in up to my ankles, and to hold my breath as long as I could, at some point, open my eyes, realize where I was, and start vibrating. Then at that point, they took me out and they put Dane Farwell in and they blew up the tank. And there goes Dane out over the loading dock on gallons of water propelled out over the loading dock. I mean, it was crazy. I remember, Danny, you walked off the set when they were draping me with snakes. And Lana almost lost her mind. Here comes I didn't know, there was a snake gag. He throws a mirror down. I look, I'm covered in snakes. And I go, snakes! Well, here comes the guy with the garbage bags. They take the snakes out and they start draping them around. The next thing, Lana almost passes out. People are leaving the set. At one point, a snake crawled over my head and got between my sunglasses, and I could see the tongue going out, and I had no trouble going, snakes! I was like, now, if I yell and make a sudden move, are they gonna attack me? And he said, no, 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 they're fine. I don't know what kind of snakes they were, but yeah, that was an experience.
Well, talk about a few of the other guest stars that you guys really that you remember kind of special.
Yeah, you look, April Webster was a major force in this show. So we talk about Howard or Paul and I, or we didn't talk about Gail Hickman, who was a real experienced TV showrunner who kept things stabilized in the writing room. But April, the casting of the show for television in 1990 is extraordinary. Between who she discovered, right? Or just so the episode I'm watching last night, John, you're not gonna. I didn't remember this till I'm watching it. All of a sudden, we're in an art gallery scene, and Mr. Blackwell is there making some one-line comment. Remember, he used to give the top 10 dress list and all that's best dressed. And then at the end, the bad girl meets up with her boyfriend, who is Billy Hayes, the guy from Midnight Express, the real Billy Hayes, who was the movie was based on. And he gets in the car, and there's a joke about, she goes, "Where do you want to go?" And she says, "Istanbul." And he says, "No, thanks." It's like, but we can go to the bigger one. There was like, I think Angela Bassett was in it.
Angela Bassett, Bryan
Bryan
Cranston,
Cranston.
Michael Champion.
Yeah, I mean, it's
It just
if I
went
keep
on and on.
thinking, April would always bring great people, and our show wasn't a big hit where everybody was like, "I want to do the Flash," but I guess, like you, John, after we were rolling and we were on the air, we did get pretty good reviews up front. I mean, we got a
Oh,
lot of
pretty
good reviews.
good. I have an
Yeah.
entire framed thing. Washington Post, New York Times. Well, had two reviews in the New York Times. One wasn't so good. One was a rave. Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Examiner, Atlanta Courier Journal. No, Atlanta Constitution, the Louisville Courier Journal. All the major newspapers. Whenever anyone, I just take it enough personally enough. When anyone makes some uninformed crack about the 1990 show, having no idea about the history of television or the context into which we appeared. I just, without comment, I just put those reviews. Because all the critics and all the major 9.5 on the Zowie Wowie scale, perhaps the best looking show ever made for television. And we're not talking like today, blog. We're talking major critics from the major newspapers all across the country, you know. So yeah, pretty good. They were our reviews were excellent. And you know what I kept being told was, and I guess this is partly Hank McCann, who was my manager then, he said, "John, it's an industry hit. The industry loves it."
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Interesting. Because Paul and I did get a huge deal at Paramount after we left Warner Brothers, and it was all because of the Flash. It was all about our what we put on the screen. We all put on the screen. Do you have some more questions?
Yeah,
Tim?
I mean, kind of keying off that, there's questions here, and I just won't read it specifically, but talk a little bit about the response of the show, and then when you found out you weren't going to get another season, and and then if you had another season, some general thoughts.
Well, let me explain that with all of those great reviews, we had the worst time slot in the history of television. So they put us on at 8 o'clock on Thursday night. That was when NBC owned Thursday nights, right? And this was the only young, quote unquote, young show at CBS. So then Fox drops The Simpsons on our head at 8 also. So what are we going to do? CBS decides to move us to 8:30. We may be the last hour show ever to air on a half hour. I think we are. I don't think it was done earlier in the 60s and stuff, and maybe in the 70s, but certainly not in the 90s or beyond. And that was just to get away from The Simpsons, which was a massive hit. So we have The Simpsons, we have Cosby, we have all that stuff. And I remember we averaged a 16 share. Of course, now that's a massive hit. That's like ridiculous, absurd hit.
20 some million viewers. Yeah, you could
It's
have a
huge.
hit with 6 million viewers now.
Yeah, right. So, and then we were canceled was what the most disappointing thing, and I'm sure John will concur, aside from the fact that he was wiped out, was we were figuring it out the whole
Yeah,
time. Like we were trying to make it better and better, and what works and what doesn't work, and we finally got to supervillains and still believable, right?
still
With
believable.
costume villains, and we felt like we were hitting our stride, right? So we were all, everybody's heard this one, but we were all excited. We were going to do a 2 hour launch with our best villains, Mark Hamill, David Cassidy, and Michael Champion. We were going to have Captain Cold, the Mirror Master, and the Trickster. We start to build our rogues gallery, which is from the comics, right? Which is famous. And imagine what we could have done with those actors in those roles in a recurring team up against the Flash. I don't know if the audience was ready, honestly. But the kids at the time grew up now, and that's why we have this Blu-ray, right? That's why they had a model that said, let's make it because enough people will buy it. So,
Yeah, what I always tell people, my young people at my audiences, at my Q&As, conventions, I say, if you can sort of suspend your disbelief and imagine a time before DVR. Yes, there was a land before DVR, because we went on in the most difficult time slot and held our own, came in a decent third. I got a call from Jeff Skansky saying, listen, we are happy with the numbers that you guys got. If you guys can maintain that, we are fine. We think, it held so well on the advanced word. And then CBS, of course, had the oldest demographic, as Danny said. So all our in-house advertising didn't reach our target audience. And then we were on the air, and then CBS had the World Series. And then we were off for 2 weeks. And then we were back on the air. And then the first Gulf War broke out, and we were preempted. Then they moved us to the half hour. Then they changed our night. I knew when I was starting to get fan mail like, where are you? We can't find you. I was like, only a matter of time, if your core audience. I think if there had been DVR, we'd probably still be doing
Yeah.
Flash.
Well, it was rare back then, but one of the fans asked, were there any discussions about trying to do something off cable or syndication? Or was that still too early before the industry was doing that?
too
Too early,
early.
yeah. See, you also didn't have that advantage as an
Well, we
option.
did it. I did it on another show only 3 years later.
Yeah.
Honestly, the Viper, we went from network to syndication 3 years later. I would guess that Warner Brothers wasn't thinking in those business models at that time. It wasn't in their strategy. Um, Never was talked about. We were just done. It was like bam,
Was it
done.
at the time? Was it considered an expensive show produce?
Oh,
At
yeah.
first, at
It was
first
the
it was
most
really.
expensive show Warner Brothers had ever done, right? For television.
I think at first, like, because we were supposed to, if I remember correctly, we were supposed to be doing them for about 1 million or 1,000,001, and those first 3 or 4 episodes were coming in at 1,400,000. And there was a night on the back lot where all the executives came down to meet with me and Don and Paul. And they said, if you don't get this down to $1 million an episode, we're pulling the plug. And so that was after the first, I guess, 4 episodes, it seemed like. And then we just reeled it in and, you know, got less extravagant with locations or whatever. I
But
can't remember.
how much was our pilot? Because I've
I think that
heard
was close to
numbers.
$4 million. I think
Four,
it
I've
was
heard
close to
six.
four.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was, I don't remember, but I think maybe four, maybe
Okay.
six. I don't know. At the time, a pilot was 2.5, let's say, for a Talking Heads pilot. So it definitely was an expensive pilot. And we ran a big second unit that I did with all the motorcycles and all those action things. So, yeah.
Well, that it is what it is in terms of the second season and all of those things that were thrown, those challenges thrown at you. It's unfortunate, but there's still a huge legacy. There's still a huge legacy of what this show did. And I think in terms of what we are living through now over the last 10, 15, 20 years, the multiverse, CW shows, just the way comic book heroes have dominated TV and cinema for the last couple decades. So when you guys think about that and you think about your place in that, what are some thoughts you have?
I'm very proud that I have been fortunate in my career to land in different mediums at the beginning of a new way of telling them. I landed in 1980 in daytime at the beginning of the youth revolution. Julianne Moore was my leading lady. Kevin Bacon was my dressing room mate, and then I came into the world of the Flash at this brand new way, cutting edge way of telling these stories for adult audiences. I love Danny. One thing he said to me, I loved it at the beginning. He said, "Listen, if we have our way, PTAs across the country are going to be calling up and complaining every week." He was telling me, "You won't be saving a kid from a burning building on page 6. You won't. I promise, I won't put you in a pair of red tights. It's going to be high tech. We're taking this seriously, and it's going to be done right." And I was on my way somewhere with that, but I got lost.
Well, just the legacy of you playing the Flash and breaking the ground for so many who came after you, actors. And
Oh yeah, and they readily at San Diego Comic Con, at conventions that I do, it is a given that our show, Danny and Paul's show, in 1990-91, laid the groundwork for everything that came after. And as David Nutter put it, none of us would be here today if these guys hadn't proved that it could be done successfully. And by successfully, I think he meant successfully, creatively, believably.
I actually never heard any of that, so it's nice to hear. You know,
Oh yeah.
we just did the best we could at the time, and we were. Here's another trick to the whole thing. Paul and I were never on another TV show before this, and during the pilot period, or right around when they were going to greenlight the pilot, they wanted to hire another showrunner for us to work for because we had never run a show before. And I, in my youthful arrogance, said, "Absolutely not. You do that, we're out of here." Now, what did I care? I was 34. You know what I mean? It's like I have my whole life ahead of me. Now I'd be like, wait a minute, what are you risking? But no, we said, screw it, and they backed off. And here's the thing. We never ran a writing staff. We were movie heads. We grew up with a lot of television, but stopped watching when we got to adulthood. And that's not completely true. Paul and his wife watched a lot of TV. But we approached everyone fresh. I mean, I heard a comment that Don, my good friend, said to somebody on the crew, and I've actually never said this to him, that I know this, that he said, "These kids don't know what they're doing. They're just playing in a sandbox." Like at the beginning, like he was taking a shot at us because we did creatively. We certainly didn't have a ton of Now, I did know how to make film. It's not like I didn't. I was a camera assistant. My father was a director. I grew up on sets. I paid a lot of attention to it. My father also directed as many of these as
Bruce
anybody.
Wilson. Yeah.
Yeah, many, and he's still alive, 96.
Really?
Yeah.
Great.
He's still with us. But we had a way of doing shows. I mentioned a little bit earlier of just go make your movie because we didn't have all of these TV references as TV makers, right? We were just like, let's just make a good story and get it past the network. Let's go make. And the big challenge at first was getting villains in. I've mentioned it a few times, but this was a serious problem because Paul and I grew up with the Superman TV show. Did you, John? The Superman TV show with George Reeves. And our whole thing was, even though we loved it, we didn't want to be fighting counterfeiters and bank robbers. It was like, absolutely not. And at the beginning, the network was saddling us with our version of counterfeiters and bank robbers to some degree. I will say, we had Sven with injecting the stuff right away. I mean, it wasn't so much. But once we got it, we would ease our way to it. There was the Ghost, who was kind of like an original supervillain that we created. We were moving our way towards the Trickster. But finally, we wrote it. We knew we were going to do it. And the other anecdote, of course, is that we didn't call Mark. Mark called us. Mark called up and said, I want to be on The Flash. And if you ever do a Trickster, I would love to do it. And we already had the script, and like, we were only like a few weeks away from casting it. It was total kismet, right? And again, like John said, and I said, and I saw Mark recently, went over and hung out with him. All of us became close through this crazy experience of one season. And he just put that thing on and just went. I never said, take it down, Mark, right? I never said, can you bring it down a little? Never, because he knew how to do it within the realms of, because he was a psycho, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Remember, he'd go through singing that crazy song, it was anyway. And as John said, and then John was tripping on marbles and being subjected to his goofy shit. And so that for me. Those are probably my favorites because it was where we first kind of realized the vision, and we had great acting talent in it. I think Joyce was in it too, if I recall, as the reporter carried over from another episode. So
yes,
it was people
yes,
to work with. And anyway, we had a good experience, that's for sure. And are we pissed it didn't go another year? I'll say right now to the camera, yes.
Yeah. Well, I look, there's a new Blu-ray coming out. It looks terrific. That's how we started the conversation today.
Yeah.
And we'll wrap with that. But I think that this is an opportunity. Obviously, I grew up with the show, and people my age, we're going to want the show because of the bit of the nostalgia, right? And the fact that, hey, I was watching it. I haven't seen it look that good since the beginning, right? Maybe not even then, because the TVs we had back then were not that, our families was not that great. Now I'm looking at it on a 4K monitor running through my Blu-ray machine, and it looks fantastic. But what do you kind of hope that the new Blu-ray will do, maybe for younger fans?
I hope that, and I'll let John end, but I hope that people see it in the context of the time. Then it's really excellent. Like if you look at Dr. No, the first James Bond movie, and you say, think about everything going on around this in 1961, it's really impressive. And I ask that the Flash holds up. It's sweet, it's naive, it's charming, it's got a lot of heart and a lot of wild imagination too. But remember, look at it in the time it was made. It was pretty, we were pushing the envelope a lot. And
it was pretty mind-blowing for the time, as our reviews would attest.
10-year-old watches it cold, hopefully they'll really, it's very human. You know what I mean? It's very relatable. And I'll hand over to the actor now who performed it.
I mean, it's something that's never really left me. It came back when the DVD was originally released in 2006, and I started doing conventions. And then when I joined the new Flash, so the people who would come up to me and say, I watched your original Flash in 1990 with my father, and now I'm watching the CW Flash with and they get tears in their eyes, kids. And you're the thread that runs through that, for my family. As back to David Nutter, there was a scene, that I had to do where I had to be, he was very crafty, but he was also being very sincere. And right before they called action, he came up to me and he said, you were my hero growing up. Action, and I'm like, but no, JC asked me why you never go or do conventions like Howard does conventions. If you did, you would realize to this day how important the show is. And I'll say one more thing. My parting gift, they said, do you have a parting gift to Grant Gustin at the end of the series? And I said, if I have a parting gift, it's to tell Grant when he wants to assess the quality of his work and his show 30 years from now, go back and read the reviews that were written and the industry reaction at the time to assess the quality. Because, 30 years from now, who knows what's going to be happening, And for a while there, I would get pretty upset because a lot of people who had no idea of context or what we were walking into. I say we, what Danny and Paul were walking into, and I got to be a part of it. People have no idea of that, don't realize the impact that it had, you know. So, when for a while there, these bloggers who really didn't have a sense of context would say, well, it's this, it's that, it's not this, it's not that. Now, I feel, and particularly with the Blu-ray release and people seeing it the way it was meant to be seen for the most part, it's going to assume its rightful place in the legacy of the Flash franchise entertainment.
Yeah, and I had the opportunity to work at Warner Home Entertainment while the more current Flash was on, as you referenced it. And I was thinking that those people who really loved the show, bought the Blu-rays of that show, I think they need to add this to their collection because
Well, they are.
yeah, because it really, especially with you being in both of them, of course, John, but I think it just creates such great
Thank
context
you, Danny.
to what you said too as well, is that, you guys established that world in TV and that legacy that you've created. It's a great thing for the collectors and the fans of the Flash and all of DC, really. All that's been created in this DC universe. And it's fantastic to get a chance to chat with you and offer this to the fans. Not every fan can make it to the convention. So this allows people to hear your thoughts in ways that maybe if they couldn't get to a convention. And especially, Danny, now that I know that you don't go to conventions, thank you.
I'm never invited. It's not. I'm not
Okay,
resistant.
we're gonna need to try to change that and get you to a convention because I think it'd be great to talk about this Blu-ray at some point too. So, but thank you both for coming on.
Absolutely.
Thank you both for coming on, and it's
Thanks for having
been a
me.
pleasure. So,
Danny, it's great to
All
see
right.
you.
See you, John, soon.
Yes.
All right.
thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Tim.
As always, follow us on social media, subscribe if you haven't yet, and thanks for listening.